Natalie, if you wouldn't mind, if you just stand up, please. I do that to my wife all the time. She don't like it. But this is Natalie Frye. That's his dear wife. They're a wonderful couple. I appreciate them so much, and they're both good friends. So let's pray and get started, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. Father, I pray now that you bless this hour. Father, please watch over the technology. We know for whatever reason it always seems to be a challenge no matter where we go or what we do. Technology always is difficult. So Lord, would you please help it to run correctly, everything to work right on spot order. So we commit that to you. I pray that you bless Jerry, Lord, as he brings us wonderful, deep information to us. Help us to comprehend it. Help us to be thrilled by what we're going to hear and see this morning. So Father, we commit all this to you in Jesus' very precious name. Amen. Jerry Frye.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the reason that picture is up there is just to remind us at the start that the heavens declare the glory of God. There's no place where its word is not heard or understood. And like it in Romans, we're told that we as humans are without excuse, because what may be known of God has been made manifest to us through the creation. His Godhead and his power is all made manifest to us. Now there we go. So the path we're going to follow today is actually a very biblical one. We're going to follow the discussion that Job had with his friends. And it says, ask the beasts and they will teach you. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to ask the beasts. And the birds of the air, they will tell you, or speak to the earth, it will teach you. And the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who amongst all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind? So the issue is God's put a propositional statement out there. There's no place that the heavens don't declare his glory on earth. There is no place where we can look in nature, the beasts, the birds, the fish, the earth itself, that it doesn't actually scream that there is a creator. And the purpose of that, that's all called general revelation, is that we might seek him. The point of general revelation is to seek him. So for Christians, this is, for us, it's a matter of encouraging ourselves, getting grounded in our faith, especially in a culture that wants to deny any connection between what we're going to talk about and God as creator. So we're going to talk first, a little bit deep, about mathematical patterns in nature. So the first thing to recognize is they do exist. I'm going to show you two examples shortly. But the first thing about this is that humans are unlike any of the rest of creation. We can recognize these patterns. Matter of fact, last week, if you were able to be here, you saw the thing we call biomimicry. It's an entire industry. And this is where man has a problem, and it looks to nature for the solving of that problem. Now, if you have a problem, do you look for the results of an explosion of dynamite? I mean, they're saying that we happened as a result of chance. Why would you look to nature? Unless nature is orderly. Unless nature is the way Einstein described it. He says we think God's thoughts after him. And that's the reason that biomimicry makes sense. So there's this existence of information, and this is not to be discounted. This is incredibly important. And today, what the culture will do is not deny that the information is self-generating, but rather they're going to point you to outer space. It's called directed panspermia, and they're going to tell you the aliens did it. Okay, that's what that means. And you're going to find multiverses, right? We can't look anywhere else. They'll say, okay, that's impossible to happen by accident, but it happened here, but it didn't happen in a billion trillion other places that we can't see, these multiple universes. These are the kinds of explanations that are being given to your kids so that they are not held accountable. There's another issue about this information. That is aesthetics, beauty. How do you explain beauty? Beauty has nothing to do with Darwinism. Nothing. or selection of the fittest. Matter of fact, Darwin said that the sight of a peacock feather made him sick, because the fact of the matter is it destroys his theory. Peacock feather is pretty just because it's pretty, and it is unbelievably complex. We don't have time to go over that today, but the other thing is there is nothing on the planet that appreciates aesthetics, only us. Aesthetics is one of the vestiges of the image of God, right? So God did these things. He put them out there for us. He tells us we're accountable for it, and you get an appreciation not only that these patterns exist, all hallmarks of a designer or creator, but that there is certain elegance, like the coloring of leaves. There is no Darwinian reason for leaves to change colors, yet there are 6 very complicated processes that yield that for you. You can go down into the ocean in the nudibranchs. These are sea slugs, most found below 25 meters. There is no light that penetrates natural sunlight below 25 meters other than blue generally. Yet you get down there, you take our natural light, you put it there, most gorgeous, beautiful colors. That's just sitting there waiting for us, right? And it's only humans that can see that. The rest of the sea world doesn't see any of that. So there's this idea about information and aesthetics that's very, very important. This is called the Fibonacci sequence. 91% of all nature is described by these ratios. It's about a 3-minute video. What that tells you, and I know it's hard to understand if you're not used to the math, but the fact of the matter is the wings of a dragonfly have the same mathematical formula as the distribution of sunflower seeds on the head of the sunflower. It used to be called the fingerprint of God. It still is. It's just not taught. You were not considered classically educated from about the 13th century until about the 19th century unless you understood this. This was taught everywhere, certainly in Western civilization. The idea that this relationship between these. I have to tell you, it applies to it doesn't matter where you look. The orbits of the planets, the relationship of the parts of DNA. It just does not matter where you look. You're going to find this. It's called Fibonacci sequence. The sunflower and the nautilus that you saw earlier are the two symbols of this. And the sunflower, I got to remember to stick it up here. That sunflower design is very unusual. Something called phyllotaxis. There are two rows. One set of rows goes clockwise, another goes counterclockwise. They are always adjacent Fibonacci numbers. And as a result, they're distributed at this, it's called an angle, a golden angle, at roughly 137.5 degrees. As a result, the distribution of sunflower seeds on the sunflower are absolutely optimal. You couldn't make it any better for distribution of sunlight and water. It's absolutely the best. So seed distribution. To give you an idea, see those thing down there? The distribution is actually the middle one. If it's done to the golden angle, if it moves 1/10 of a degree, you can see either side. You don't get that. So again, it's just like the universe we talked about. It's finely tuned. Everything is exactly what it needs to be to produce what we see. These are called Mandelbrot series. They're called fractals. You've heard of them perhaps in relation to snowflakes, right? They're called fractals. And so if you look at a snowflake, on the edge of the snowflake, you'll see the same pattern as the snowflake. That goes down about 6 levels in nature. In the universe, though, it's infinite. And only God makes things infinite. Everything in creation is finite, but it's infinite when we put this into the computer. And give you an idea, it is very mathematical. Virtually everything is just unbelievably organized, and there is no way that this mathematical formula and its relationship to everything we see is somehow an accident. It's not. It's an evidence of the design. It's the very thing God's talking about. And I like to just throw this in. God takes credit, personal credit, for the ears and the eyes. You think about it. How else do you know about anything we're talking about? How else do you get the gospel? There may be a rare few that can get the gospel through some other method, right? But the fact of the matter is, it's the ears and the eyes, and the discussion of them is, go to Answers in Genesis or Institute for Creation Research. The research here is just unbelievable. I will talk to you about the eye in some detail in a bit. So now we'll start down this discussion from Job. Ask the beasts and they will tell you. So let's look at a couple of beasts. First off, you need to just remind yourself that the story that the kids are being told is they come from stardust, and the stardust somehow creates this single amoeba, and then you go from the goo to the zoo to you. And that's the story the kids are being told, essentially. Now, I want to talk about, that's one method. That's one discussion about where they came from. Another is that when we see variation, it's engineered adaptability, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. And so that says God created everything after its kind, and that all the adaptability it needs is in the genome already. It's already there. And when we see things separate, it's usually the result of the loss of genetic information, not the addition of new. So the story that your kids are being told, your grandkids are being told, is essentially genetic mutations lead to evolution. The vast majority of genetic mutations happen as a result of something breaking the double strand. Could be a UV proton, could be a chemical, could be lots of things. But the fact of the matter is, that's what they're being taught. That's the mechanism. Something comes in and messes with your DNA, like maybe messenger RNA. I'll just leave it there. So something comes in and that causes changes. And from those changes, those little changes, new functions, new organs, new whatever appear. And ultimately, you go from the goo to the zoo to you. So let's look at this little water piglet. Sometimes it's called a bear piglet or whatnot. It's got a number of names. It's actually called a tardigrade. Tardigrades are near microscopic. They live in moist areas. You have tardigrades in your yard if you have a garden. If there's any moss, there's tardigrades in it. So tardigrades, known as moss piglets or water bears, they're microscopic, 8-legged, about the size of dust. So they're not microscopic, but they're very small. Okay. So there's a whole series of things about tardigrades that have just stunned the secular world, and ought to stun us too. There we go. So they took tardigrades because they noticed that they were unusual. They sent them into space to the International Space Station, not on purpose. And they spent 10 days out there with no oxygen. They jettisoned them out of the space station. So they're just out in space in a little thing to make sure they couldn't get away, but nothing there. 10 days, no oxygen. By the way, they came right back in and picked up right where they left off. So they can live 10 days without oxygen, but they're not anaerobic. They're aerobic creatures. They were exposed to UV radiation 1,000 times greater than what's on the Earth's surface, right? We call those cockroaches, right? Cockroaches are the ones that are supposed to resist all the nuclear radiation, etc. Well, these things took 1,000 times. 1,000 times radiation will kill the cockroach. Didn't bother these guys at all. Not only that, they didn't have any mutations in the succeeding generations. So they were completely impervious. They can withstand pressure 6 times greater than the deepest spot in the ocean. Every 33 feet you go down in water, lake or ocean water, you add 14.7 square pounds per square inch. Okay, so you add a lot of pressure, and your body can handle a certain amount of it, but as you know, most divers can only go a couple hundred feet, which would be maybe a 8 times factor, and then you can't go any deeper. You also have things called the bends and things like that as a result of this, so we just can't do that. So this thing can handle 6 times the Marianas Trench, which is 7 miles down. Every 33 feet, you're adding another 14.7 pounds per square inch. I didn't bother to do the math, but let's just say it's a really, really big number. And then they have been frozen at minus 272 Celsius. Absolute Kelvin is minus 273. Kelvin 0 is the end of the universe. If there's no heat in the universe, nothing moves, nothing works. Has to be heat. And so at the end of the day, this thing can go almost down to that, because we don't know what minus 273 looks like. Can't do that. But minus 272, and this thing survived. So it looks like they're pretty hard to kill. They can exist in boiling water and at temperatures near absolute 0. They've been known to exist in a dehydrated state for a century and come back. Just add water. Kid you not, just add water. They have the ability to shut down their metabolism. This is how they do it. There's something else too, but they can literally turn off their metabolism. You know what we call it when we turn off our metabolism? Dead. Okay. This thing can turn it back on at the cellular level. Why does it have these capabilities? What in the world? Because I want you to think about this. What the evolutionist will tell you is all these capabilities came as a result of the environmental pressure in the environment. Well, there is no place that's more than 6 times more than the Marianas Trench deep. There is no place that has that kind of radiation except maybe the center of a nuclear bomb. You know, you don't have that. These conditions don't exist on Earth. So why does this animal have, there's no reason for them to exist. I think there is a reason. I think it's a biotic message. I think God's literally saying, I designed it this way. You try to figure out how it happened without me. I think it's got a sense of humor. There is no reason that this thing needs to be like this. Yet, you know, it just confounds people. Absolutely dumbfounding. So I think I skipped a slide. So there's a couple of other things that they're finding out as they started researching this creature. And it has irregular proteins. So we didn't even know irregular proteins were a thing until we found this. It's the only animal we've ever found them in. And essentially what happens is that the protein is irregular as long as it has water, as long as it's in a normal situation. It's just nothing. It's like noodles floating around in its bloodstream, which, by the way, if this thing is the size of a mite, can you imagine the thing that's inside its bloodstream? Small, 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 small. So at the end of the day, what happens is, as the water loses, these proteins don't lose their function. They suddenly gain the only function they were designed for. They create a lattice around the nucleus. This is how the thing is able to reconstitute itself, because the nucleus never gets attacked, even when it loses water, radiation, any of this stuff. We don't know of anything that has that. Then there's another thing. Drying leads to high levels of peroxides and other what are called reactive molecules. So just like radiation, it has another, these disordered proteins, they shield the other vital proteins. So the first level shields the nucleus, and then the other one goes around to the other proteins. There are proteins, for instance, in the mitochondria, the flower factory of the cell, that aren't always found in the nucleus. The proteins in the mitochondria come entirely from the female line. There aren't any male proteins there. So anyway, it's just impossible to explain. And so I add this. I'm not going to add too much more to this. But the fact of the matter is, this tardigrade is something we simply don't understand. And so now the recommendation is that this animal was not created on Earth, that this animal came in on a meteorite. So again, the aliens have done it. And you're going to see this story over and over and over again, because somewhere it had to have the environmental pressure to create these responses to the environment. And you don't have that on Earth. And so as somebody who believes in God, who created these animals for our enjoyment and our knowledge, and to point to Him, this certainly does all those things. So that's called engineered adaptability, not mutations. This thing didn't come from its DNA getting scrambled up. As a matter of fact, the minute the DNA comes under attack, it's shielded. So at the end of the day, that explanation doesn't matter. I have a whole series of other engineered adaptability examples. We may have time, but I don't think so I'm going to skip over them. But this is just an example, trying to give you a little taste in each of these areas. Diabolical, I don't know who names these things, but they're called diabolical ironclad beetles. It's a little beetle. It looks a little annoyingly like those stink bugs we have around here, but it's not. But it can withstand 149 newtons. I want to give you an idea in the scientific world what that means. It's about 39,000 times its body weight. You can put that on top of the shell and it won't crush. It can literally withstand. So you can drive over this bug with your car. He's just going to dust himself off and walk away. So it has many layers of a hard exoskeleton, starting with the fused elytra. All beetles have a series of wings, and then over the wings are these elytra, and they're the thing we normally see on the beetle. It's closed. It's to protect the beetle's wings. Most propagation issues for beetles are the males will attack each other and try to take out the other's wings, because no female will willingly mate with a beetle that's lost his wings. He's basically dead. And so at the end of the day, this elytra is important. This particular beetle does not fly, and that's because the elytra has been fused solid to its exoskeleton. As a result, it can handle this enormous weight. It has these puzzle-like joints. So I'd like to take you into an electron microscope of the elytra fused to the exoskeleton in an ironclad diabolical beetle. So at the end of the day, there are three types of microstructures inside. One called the lower page is interdigited. There's a latching and a freestanding. That's interdigited right there. That's latching, and this is freestanding. So it has these three very separate structures along the elytra that connect it to the exoskeleton. So the example is that for you and I, if we were to have similar strength against weight being pressed on us, we could carry 39 tons. Give you an idea. Again, what in the world does this thing need to have this kind of capability? And not only that, it came up with these three very, very elaborate structures that give enormous structural strength. You can be sure that our engineers are studying this like crazy to figure out how to use this. This is mostly being studied for oceanic studies, so submarines, deep submersible vehicles, etc. Because if they could figure a way to strengthen the titanium shell, obviously they could handle deeper depths. So those are a couple of examples of beasts. These are birds of the air. So let's talk about a couple of these. I'm going to start with the peregrine falcon, which is one of my favorite topics. And so peregrines have the highest speed of any of the birds. They dive, the highest clocked is about 275 miles an hour. It has a nictating membrane in each eye. It's an extra eyelid. It's transparent. Our eyelids are not transparent. This one is transparent. This allows it to keep its eyes open during a dive at 275 miles an hour. This is because the peregrine kills by kinetic energy. The peregrine literally kills by striking, and it's literally the shock of the hit. It's like an auto accident every time it hits somebody. So falcons are bird eaters, unlike eagles, and they kill other species by essentially flying right into them. They crash into them. So other things about them, when you get into the area of birds of prey, and we don't have time to do this today either, but eagles, falcons, hawks, owls, very, very different creatures. They use different mechanisms. They're designed differently. For instance, a hawk can go through the woods at 50 miles an hour and not hit a branch. A peregrine falcon would be dead within 10 feet. Can't do it. Has no rudders, has no tail tail feathers to deal with this. At the end of the day, can't do it. You will not find a falcon in wooded areas. That's the home of hawks. Hawks refresh their eye rates 50 times. The hawk gets 50 images for every one that the falcon gets. Well, that's because the falcon's looking out there half a mile, sets its target, and he's there on that thing and kills it in nothing flat, but it's in the open. Not so for the hawk. He's got to follow these very fast little things all over the place, and he's got to be able to move on a dime. So he gets a different picture of what's in front of him, 50 times faster, about 8 times faster than humans. So they can only hunt in the open spaces. So I thought you might find that picture on the left interesting. That is a hawk defending itself. It can literally fly upside down. Part of the hawk's ability is its eyes are set halfway, and the hawk can have one eye look one direction, and so he can look down at what he's looking for, his prey, but he can also look above for the peregrine falcon. Same time. When you and I do that, that's cross-eyed. That's no good. So how do we think they navigate? So the peregrine falcon, the one I'm most familiar with, or the group I'm most familiar with, come out of Alaska, and they migrate every year 7,000 miles to a number of islands, but principally Fiji. So first off, I have a question for you. What possessed the first hawk to leave Alaska and even assume there is a Fiji? And then why go there? Okay. Well, maybe not. Lots of things stay. So the issue is that these are all over the world. These are paths for the peregrines, which live on all 6. They just don't live on Antarctica. Every other continent they live on. And so they go south. And then there's a North American route on the east, and I'm actually talking about the one to the left that goes out the Pacific Ocean. But they do this all over the world, and each one has made it to its own place. So how do they get there? You and I can't get from my house in Delafield to here without GPS, right? So that's not quite true, but almost. And then this is a hawk. You may not know this, but there are almost no pigeons in Chicago. And that's it? Oh, is that right? Yeah, I didn't know about downtown Racine. But they take over. They find an area where there's lots of open spaces between those skyscrapers and lots of wind. Boy, you're talking Peregrine territory, and they own downtown Chicago. But how do they get 7,000 miles? The Chicago ones don't have to leave if they don't want to. Well, the magnetic field of the Earth turns out to be a big part of it. So there's a complex molecule called a polyporphyrin. It's made of a carotenoid, a porphyrin, and a fullerene. It's in the right eye of this bird. And what happens is, as soon as it can get light, it creates a charge on one end, the carotenoid end. Actually, you don't care about that. It creates a charge. And at the end of the day, the charge wants to go back to neutral. In doing that, the bird has a mechanism inside of itself, the brain built there, that measures where it is in relation to the magnetic field of the Earth. And so it can tell, generally, we think within about 50 feet, where it's at on the Earth, simply by this charge that happens in the presence of light in their right eye. I know this sounds cruel, but they did test some peregrines that had lost their right eye, and they can't do this. They can't migrate. They don't have it. So it is definitely this molecule. It turns out, I think I went backwards, sorry. Turns out that the Earth magnetic field does have you can see, there's we've mapped it, we know what it is. Essentially what this molecule in the eye of the bird measures this. It turns out pigeons do too. Pigeons have magnetite in their beak and can actually do this as well. Then it turns out European robins going across the Mediterranean do this entirely different with something called a cryptosome, which serves the same purpose in the back of their eye. So this again is the Lord making sure you understand nothing accident about this, right? It's really fascinating discussion. So anyway, that's what's going on inside the bird brain. And let me ask you something. If I gave you a single GPS coordinate, I could give you the coordinate for this church. What good does it do you? GPS coordinates are only good if the coordinate is actually attached to a map that has all the other coordinates. So you understand the implication of that. That this mechanism to measure this difference in relation to the magnetic field is then applied to a map, which can then be used for what's called path integration. This is a very complex thing, and this assumes that this map has been put there ahead of time, right? You and I have to download it into our computer or into our phone or into our car, whatever. Well, somebody downloaded it into the head of this bird ahead of time. So I don't want you to ever look at a peregrine falcon the same. They are a wonder of creation, and we could spend a week literally talking about all of its attributes. But this navigation alone is enough that there's no way that happened by accident. And if you were here last week, you may remember I gave you a similar story. You should never look at mustard seeds the same again either. This field of mustard, these are the metabolic processes inside of a mustard seed. And these happen to be the processes just to deal with the chloroplast, the photosynthesis process inside. You shouldn't be able to look at that the same anymore either. This is what God's saying. You can tell he exists, and you can tell a lot about his character simply by what's been made. Humans are the only species on the planet that understand this. The only part of the created order. So it turns out falcons aren't the only things that use the magnetic field. We know that polarity, the polarity portion of the magnetic field, is used by lobsters, newts, salmons, and mole rats. I'm sure there's more, but these are examples. The inclination, the actual angle of the animal to the magnetic field and the force lines. Bees and sea turtles both use it. Intensity, bees and alligators, I'm going to show you bees a little bit later, and multiple cues. Butterflies, falcons, and dragonflies can actually use all of these cues. So all of nature is tied into these mathematical relationships and connected to the actual physical properties of the planet Earth. So when God says, I made the earth to be inhabited, I am the Lord, there is no other, he's basically saying, look, you can't deny me based on what's been made. You may deny me because of your heart condition, but you're not going to do it because of what's been made. So this is a bee. Anybody know how many eyes a bee has? A lot. That's right. 5, you're right. So bees have 5 eyes. And you've got the compound eyes, but it has 3 what are called ocelli to detect light changes from above. So the bee can use its eyes to do its work, but always be aware if there's something coming in to eat it from above. The B2 compound eyes have tiny hairs growing on them. It detects wind detection. The hairs on a bee also collect pollen. I'll explain that in a couple of minutes. They also can use the sun, so their eyes have the ability to polarize light. That means even if it's cloudy, they can see the sun at any given time. So that's why that doesn't matter to them. Bees can see ultraviolet light, and they can detect motion in as little as 1/300th of a second. Humans are about 1/50th of a second. I'm nowhere near that fast. But so compound eyes. Where did these compound eyes come from? We talked last week about the Cambrian explosion. Compound eyes, that's what's pictured right there over on the left. Those three of them, those are fossils, right? They're 540 million years old, plus or minus 10 million years. That's an actual picture of a shrimp on the left there, and the trilobite eyes are there, and then you've got mosquito eyes. These are all various forms of compound eyes. So let's talk about eyes. God said he made the eye. So there's at least 10 major types of compound eyes. So again, we have a God who has manifold wisdom. He displays his wisdom in many, many ways. But one of the things he does is this idea of a biotic message. Life is designed on earth so that you cannot deny that it was created or designed. You can't. You have to deny God, essentially, to deny that there's a designer. So these simple eyes supposedly turned into all of these. Well, let's look at compound eyes for just a second. There's holochroal, schizophral, and abathachroal eyes. These are the arrangement of the retina and the cornea in the eye socket. And they're very different configurations. So don't think one came from another. There's no evidence of that at all. These 3 types show up instantly in the Cambrian level, and all are there simultaneously. So it's not like one came from another. Give you an idea what this looks like. These are fossils. These are the eyes. See those little dots on the eyes? I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So that happens to be a dragonfly. You can see those compound eyes. So this is what it looks like today. So dragonfly has 30,000 of those little dots on each eye. 60,000 intakes. We would call them pixels today in your computer screen or your TV. Each one is its own discrete unit that has a piece of the picture. In this case, collects the information. Oop, I skipped a pretty good slide here. So these pixels are called ommatidia, and the point is there's one axon bundle per ommatidium, about 6 to 9 axons. That's like nerve bundles in each. So each one of these has 6 to 9 nerve bundles. And again, dragonflies have about 30,000. They are organized in very, very interesting ways. Yeah, sorry. So sometimes they're organized by color, sometimes they're organized by function, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that these functions are all different, and they're organized different, and they're structured in different kinds of eyes, right? The holocoral, abathoscoral, schizophral eyes. Inside them are rhabdomes. Is anybody getting the idea maybe this isn't an accident? This didn't just happen by itself? So in these rhabdomes, they can resolve wavelength, frequency and amplitude, both. They can resolve polarization, means it doesn't need sunglasses. Compound eyes don't need sunglasses, they have them. They can see UV. And they can detect photons. You and I don't detect photons, that's electromagnetic energy. So it deals with both the wave properties of light and the particle properties of light. So in many ways, these eyes are more complex than ours in their basic function. This supposedly, there's nothing underneath it. This supposedly came from an eye spot. So what I want you to get from here, on that picture to the left, your left, there's something called the lamina, and that has 12 specialized neurons. Those neurons, those are nerve cells. They don't exist anywhere else. They exist in this part of the dragonfly. And their job is essentially to collect and organize this information. It sends some to the lobula, which is the third structure, and that's flight mechanics. It sends some to the medulla, which is autonomic, that's like ours, our breathing, our temperature, those are all autonomic processes. And then the lobular plate does what's called third level visual processing for vertical and horizontal systems. You know, this is what our Star Wars, our missile defense stuff is all based on this, because the dragonfly kills 95% of what it eats in the air. So what it has to do is be able to adjust mid-flight and catch mosquitoes or whatever it's looking for. I hope it's mosquitoes. So I want you to know this incredibly complex system, these ommatidia with rhabdomes in these organized structures, then have all this signal processing information that goes to the brain. The dragonfly does have a brain called a lobular plate, and it is able to do things we can't even imagine out of there. Now, they're telling you that these circadian rhythm eye spots, basically that can tell dark from light, the kind of thing that might be in a cave fish or something like that, they're saying that turned into that. Okay, that's a human eye, but a human eye is no less complex than the compound eye. It's just different, very different. Same function, has the same idea. So what I want you to do, I just want you to think for a minute about this. I'm going to read this. From more complex eyes, retinal photosensitive ganglion cells send signals along the retinal hypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nuclei to affect circadian adjustment and to the pretactile area to control the pupillary light reflex. I just described the process in a dragonfly for these. Let me ask, could this sentence happen by accident? Are you kidding me? That is gobbledygook. And this is exactly what they do. They reduce something to some narrow slice and lose sight of the big picture. They do this all the time. And then they'll surround it in language like that. I've done a decent amount of study. That doesn't mean anything to me either. But this does. This is a picture of the systems, organs, processes in a dragonfly. I have to tell you, he says we are fearfully and wonderfully made, but almost everything you look at is fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't know if God's capable of doing anything less than that. It's unbelievable, the complexity, and it doesn't matter where we look. I give you this as an example. Let's talk about bees for a minute. So, talk about the honeybee. Most bees have 2 wings. They're like most insects. They have 3 segments. The last two segments have 2 wings each. They're synchronized. They work exactly together, so they have 4 wings. And they can carry about 50% of their body weight. And they collect 2 things. They collect pollen and nectar. They are not the same thing. So the pollen is brought back to the hive, turned over to special bees called nursing bees. Those bees collect and intake the pollen and create what's called pap. It literally feeds the brood to create more bees. And the nectar is to make honey, which has a different purpose. The wings beat over 200 times a second, and they have special muscles so they can fly backwards. And bees will not fly in heavy rain if they have a choice. They'll avoid it. And I'll show you the mechanism to avoid it. 1/3 of all food that we eat has probably been pollinated by a bee. These are incredibly important creatures for us. They visit up to 5,000 flowers each day, and all that hair on them, that hair is very specially designed. It's got just the right space so it'll capture the kind of pollen that'll fit between them. And what happens is, actually I'll share that with you on this slide. They use an amazing spectrum of both electro and magnetic forces. So first, they can sense the electric field that is around a flower. We don't actually know. It's going to be one of these two. They either need this so that they can tell that a bee already was there. When a bee lands on a flower, it changes the polarity of the flower. And that sends the signal to the next bee. So we don't know if the first bee is saying, hey, the great flower, stop here. Or if he's saying, no, I already stopped there, there's nothing left, go on to something else. We don't know the answer to that. They're studying that and not getting a clear answer. It sensed storms coming days in advance. Bees are great predictors of the weather, especially if it's going to be rain. For whatever reason, it's called hydrophobic. They don't like to fly in the rain. Most butterflies don't either. They navigate using magnetite in the abdomen, similar to the pigeon, and it's polarity sensitive. That means they could tell if they're in the northern or southern hemisphere, whether it made a difference or not. And then when they collect flowers, their wings are organized in a way that as they flap them, they create a negative charge. So they literally charge their hair with static electricity, all the hair on their body. And when they get to the flower is positively charged. And so that pollen literally jumps off. Bee doesn't have to go and collect it. It'll just come into his face. This is a freebie. We're not talking about crickets, but I found this really fascinating. That crickets also can tell temperature. And in particular, if you listen to a cricket, you count how many times a cricket chirps in 15 seconds, add 37, and it'll be within 1 degree plus or minus of the degrees in Fahrenheit. That's just crazy. Again, a freebie. We're back to bees. Bees have their own language. You need to understand how sophisticated these animals are. So this is the dance that says where to go, and then all of a sudden we get a different communication that has to do with how far and all of that. So there are people who study bee languages and wasp, et cetera, but they have very, very sophisticated communication to the rest of the hive. Then when I get to the honeycomb, I wonder what I skipped. Oh, you can see what the bee looks like with the pollen. Literally sticks his nose down there and the pollen jumps on top of him. You can go to YouTube. There's some pretty funny videos. The honeycomb is very interesting. I'm not hitting the right button here, obviously. There we go. So it's a hexagonal structure. It turns out it's the strongest configuration for the space that man has engineered to date. And of course, we copied this. It has the least amount of material, provides the most amount of strength, and provides the most amount of storage. Just like the distribution of seeds on a sunflower. God didn't leave details to chance. Everything is just the way it needs to be, and very, very highly engineered. On the upper left, it's a giant Asian wasp, and there is generally no honeybees that can stand against it. So it can come in and literally get through the hive, get through the defenses, and kill the queen. And it will do that. So these bees have a mechanism that's on the right. And what they do in the winter, if they're starting to get too cold and they're got to protect the queen, they'll let the others die, even the brood, and they'll surround the queen, and these bees can stop feeding their own metabolism and turn themselves into heaters. And so they start to raise the temperature. And they'll do this to keep the queen alive. Well, as a variation of that, when this wasp penetrates, they'll swarm the wasp like this, so it literally can't move, and then they will cook it alive. Most of the bees will not survive. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. This happens in hive after hive, and they never talk to each other. I mean, right? Start thinking about the implications of this. So let's speak to the earth. Let's move off the surface for a little bit. For this is what the Lord says, He who created the heavens, He is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, He founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord, there is no other. And we talked about what does it take to build something to hold a human or allow a human to survive in hostile space. We built a space station. We talked about the fact there's no accident. Space station does not happen as a result of earthquakes and wind and storms and time and none of that, right? It's engineering and a lot of it and a lot of money and effort. God said He made the earth that way. There's no place else we know of in the known universe that's friendly to mankind. None of this lives anywhere else. Trees can't get water to the top unless they're on the earth. The four forces that move water to the top of a tree, because a tree has no pumps, yet it can move 500 gallons 1,000 feet in the air. Four forces. Those four forces, it turns out, are just a little bit bigger than gravity on the earth. Wouldn't work anywhere else. This is all engineered. It's all a big system. That wasn't in the talk either, sorry. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He who founded it upon the seas established it upon the waters. Let's not ever forget this. The water did not come after the earth. The earth came after the water. People ask me to explain that. All I can tell you is God put a bunch of water in space somewhere, and He put the earth right in the middle of it. And He asks you, can you find the foundations of the earth? And of course we can't. So, where are we located? He says He's made the earth to be inhabited. So He started with water. Water was the first thing He did. Then on day 4, He makes the sun, moon, stars, all of that. We end up in this place called the Milky Way. I think I've got a circle. There you go. That's where we're located between the 4th and the 5th arm on something called the Orion Spur on the Sagittarius arm. The Perseus arm is headed out, the Sagittarius towards the center of our galaxy. We are above the galactic plane. That's extremely unusual. Most things are at the galactic plane. As a result of being above the galactic plane, we can see in both directions. If we were on the galactic plane, you would not be able to see past the spurs. Too much light. We'd have to send something to go see. So when God says that the heavens declare the glory of God, and there's no place on earth that's not known, He had to put us in a place that was habitable. And He had to put us in a place that we could observe. That's called observability. Turns out the earth is the only place that meets those two requirements that we know of. So we have this structure with the 4 outer planets. They're basically gas giants, and the 4 outer planets, 4 inner planets, with a huge asteroid belt. So the first protection is that our sun puts out something called a heliosphere, sheath. And so we know about this because we have 2 spacecraft out there that we launched back in the 70s and 80s. They were called Voyagers. And so we're actually starting to get readings. They have left our solar system. And we're finding out that our sun puts out radiation and is keeping an awful lot of stuff from other parts of the universe to get into the solar system. It's not getting here. And so it turns out we've been able to study this boundary where the sun's solar wind balances with the pressure of the interstellar medium, because there is pressure in space. They'll tell you there's no oxygen, but there is pressure. And the heliosphere is this enormous expanse of the outer reaches of the magnetic field in the solar. So the first level of protection we are given is actually our sun. And it's perfectly matched to its spectrograph, etc. It's perfectly matched to put this in just the right place, just past essentially Neptune. It's a little past Pluto most of the time. I don't know if you know this. Pluto got kicked out of the club because it's 8 degrees off the galactic plane, or the solar plane. And 3/4 of the time, Pluto's orbit was inside of Neptune. So it's called a trans-Neptunian object. It's not really in a normal orbit like the others. So, and then they found 3 others, objects in the asteroid belt that are about the same size. And Pluto's no bigger than some of Jupiter's moons. So at the end of the day, got kicked out. So, not a planet. So the next thing is our own sun puts out coronal mass ejections fairly regularly, by the way. Sometimes they were called solar flares years ago. This is when the sun releases an enormous amount of gamma rays, and it comes in. The Earth has a magnetic shield, which essentially keeps the vast majority of the gamma rays out. When those gamma rays hit our atmosphere, we know this as the aurora borealis, those beautiful lights. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but that's essentially cosmic radiation that will kill you, kill all of us, being protected by the magnetic field of the Earth, and God just uses it to make a thing of just unparalleled beauty in the sky. Then we've got the moon, and the moon-Earth is an extremely interesting connection. And so fine-tuning the Earth, our solar system is isolated relatively compared to others. We have a unique sun that's located above the galactic plane. Our radiation spectrum for the sun is exactly right for doing photosynthesis here and for supporting life. Earth is located in the habitable zone. That means that water exists in all 3 of its natural states in the natural range of the environment. Earth has a stable orbit. That's not a given, by the way. As we're looking for these extrasolar planets, and they're finding a fair number of them, or at least the inference of them, their orbits are not all that stable. Some of these they're finding, actually, the standard solar system out there has Jupiter essentially where Mercury is in our atmosphere, and its orbit might be 4 days. It's 4 days around the sun. And so obviously we could not survive in that kind of place. Our moon is relatively large and close. Our axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, is critical. 70% of the Earth is covered with liquid water. This is important because the tides and ocean currents regulate our temperature and distribute nutrients. The Earth is almost a sphere. That's not a given in space either. Earth has abundant carbon and ample silicon, both absolutely critical to life. We have a clear atmosphere, extremely unusual. If you have an atmosphere, it's usually cloudy, so you can't see through it, right? God says the heavens declare. Atmosphere has to be clear, or we wouldn't be able to appreciate that. We have a protective atmosphere that goes 38 miles above the surface. We have an oxygen-rich atmosphere that's stabilized with nitrogen. This is very important. The clouds help regulate our temperatures. So clouds are not, clouds supposed to be a bad thing, not a bad thing at all. We absolutely need it. Earth has plant life. Well, no such thing as plant life anywhere else. And I think you know this, but there is no food without plants, right? Even animals use plants. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to have the plants. Earth supports life in virtually all ecological niches. Doesn't matter how extreme the niche gets, turns out God planted life there. The Earth has a powerful magnetic field. We have things called plate tectonics and volcanism that distribute energy, and the Earth is radioactive. which it turns out is incredibly important. That's the weak nuclear force we talked about last week. So I'm going to move on because I got a few more facts to give you. So this is Jupiter. So we've got this heliosphere that's the sun is protecting us from the outer universe. Then we've got a magnetic shield, or magnetic field, that gives us a shield against our own sun. Then we got Jupiter. Just outside of the asteroid belt, Jupiter, that is Shoemaker-Levy, that's 1980. Shoemaker-Levy was scheduled to hit the Earth. That was what our calculations told us. By the time it got here, Jupiter and its gravity had sucked it outside, and Jupiter got hit. Well, then we started watching Jupiter. Jupiter gets hit all the time. Jupiter's getting hammered by big stuff. These would be ELE events here. Extinction events, extinction level event. We would not exist. We couldn't survive any of these hits. And they're going into Jupiter. And then it turns out Jupiter's gravity, this is fascinating. Somebody's got this job, by the way. They have to find every asteroid in the meteor belt, right, between Mars and Jupiter. And they have to, label them and number them, and then they track them. Then they put them in these computer programs. And when you start looking, those things spinning in the middle, those are the inner three planets, right? That's Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, the 4 planets. And so what's happening is, watch where Jupiter's line goes, there's red things and there's green things. So essentially, the asteroid belt is being driven by the gravity of Jupiter. We have no idea how many things are being stopped by the asteroid belt. They're starting to study that now. But when God said he made the earth to be inhabited, he's built a lot of protections in the very design of the solar system. So this is just a curiosity. The description of solar system formation is that there was this big cloud, a whirlwind. I shouldn't do it this way. It's all one way. Big whirlwind. And out of that whirlwind, planets formed. The meteor, the meteor belt formed, or the asteroid belt. And so, at the end of the day, up here, if you can look, you can see some faint purple lines. They're called Galilean moons. I know there it is, right here. Those are all the moons they could see in Galileo's day. So one time they'll tell you Jupiter had 6 moons, 8 moons, 10 moons. And all of those moons are prograde moons. That means they rotate in the same direction as Jupiter. That would support the idea that they could have all been formed out of some kind of whirlwind. Unfortunately, then when we got better scopes, we found some more prograde. They're out here. They're in the blue. Then we found out, because God has an enormous sense of humor, these are all retrograde. They're all going the wrong direction. So even if it got caught up in the gravity, it should go prograde. So there's just an example here that Jupiter was designed. Didn't happen out of some natural whirlwind. And then, just to add insult to injury to the secularists, there's a green line there, and they're starting to find prograde moons in the retrograde paths. Now, this is important. If you're a creationist, you can statistically plot those things. And if I put a bunch of cars on the north side in Milwaukee and on the south side in Chicago, and I took out the barrier and I let them all go, right, just across all the lanes to each other, you could probably do a calculation and figure out how long it take before they run into each other, right? You can't run retrograde orbits across prograde orbits. They will crash. They certainly can't do it for billions of years, right? This planet's supposed to be there for nearly 4 billion years. Just another indication. These do not indicate old ages. This is Jupiter seen from the James Webb telescope. That's the spot. The James Webb telescope, by the way, you're seeing spectacular images. It's a different frequency than Hubble was. So some of the most spectacular are when both of them are put at the same thing and you get a full spectrum. But the James Webb, you're going to hear all kinds of stuff. Oh, we're seeing galaxies from only 350 million years after the Big Bang. Well, that's really fascinating. So to give you an idea, the Hubble image is on the left. When you look at the Webb image, you can see you're seeing quite a bit more. So they're really on to this idea of star formation. So how many new stars are being created today? 0. Good answer. Because Scripture says he finished. He was done. We're not making new stars, but they need new stars to come out because they believe in a variation of steady state. If the stars die, the universe has to have new stars. So it fits into their theory. So I talked about observability. There's a whole series of conditions that are required for us to observe the... Okay, my wife is giving me one of the hook. So does that sound right? Okay. So anyway, Earth meets all those conditions. So I want to just get to the fish of the sea. This is a praying mantis shrimp. It's about 1.5 inches long. If you put this in your aquarium, nothing else will live. They're dead. And that's because, first off, a little bit about it. It has 16 color receptive cones in their eyes. We can only do 3. That's why everybody talks about red, green, blue, right? We have 3 color cones. We can make lots of combinations from that. This thing has 16 baseline. Its 2 raptorial claws, so raptor claws, strike at the same speed as a bullet shot out of a .22 caliber. So when it moves that claw to go in anger against something, it literally kills its prey again with kinetic energy. It doesn't even have to hit it. It creates a shock wave in the water. It'll kill whatever it's at. That's why your fish won't live. Its limbs strike so fast that the water around them boils and it lights up from the heat. Do you know what the implication of that is? Do you know how you get light from heat? Fission. You literally start separating particles in the nucleus. Again, you think a praying mantis shrimp needs this? So the cell structure of its exoskeleton is modeled now for body armor for combat troops. And the mantis shrimp will kill everything else in your aquarium and break through the glass. I know. I'm looking. I got 3 minutes. My wife's hungry for lunch. So, by the way, do you think they needed to be this beautiful? They really are striking creatures. And the Hawaiian bobtail squid, and we will have to stop here. So the Hawaiian bobtail squid is only about 4 inches long. It's found down near Hawaii, and they found a whole series of proteins that exist on this squid that they haven't found anywhere else. So essentially, it hunts for shrimp at night. It buries itself in the sand during the day. But sometimes it'll come out, and it's near the surface. So it gets eaten by anything that's swimming above it and any bird flying over. And so any kind of shadow from the sunlight or the moonlight is deadly to it. So what it does is it literally has a mechanism to take in certain bacteria. It then supports that colony. That colony is bioluminescent, and it will light up and literally adjust the light so that you can't see the shadow, whether it's moonlight, sunlight, etc. This is a trigonometry problem. We need a satellite to be able to do this. Okay, and the bobtail squid does not have eyes on the bottom of its body or anything. It literally has the mechanism to inform bacteria that it creates a sac to live in, and that bacteria work symbiotically because the bacteria live because they are in the bobtail squid. Doesn't have to worry about collecting food. Squid does that for them. So at the end of the day, what they do is they light up the squid to keep it alive. They light up the surface of the squid. So I really appreciate all your time. It was terrific. and thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be dismissed in just a minute, but thank you so much. Folks, you get the level that you just heard today. And we are fearfully and is there any doubt about it? All right, so for those of you that do homeschool, send your kids to wherever, these videos are available. Some of the stuff you did here, they're great projects for your young people if you're doing homeschool. So they'll be on our Facebook account, our website. Just go to myugbc.com. All this will be there, and sermon audio will have the video and the audio available. And there's about a year's worth of material out of what was given in an hour here. So thank you so much. We could talk all day about how marvelous this is, and some of you, your heads are spinning right now. But there's just so much things that God has done, and I appreciate experts like Jerry coming in and sharing with us. Well, we'll pray, be dismissed, and if you are available, 6 o'clock tonight, we'll be talking about from Romans, the war in my mind. Father, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for these dear folks that are here. Thank you for Jerry and Natalie and just the absolutely phenomenal things that were shared this morning about the intricacies of your amazing design. So, Father, I pray that we remember these things the best we can, that we continue to study them and understand them and be able to share with others the intricacies of the universe that you alone have made. So, Father, dismiss us with your blessing. Give us traveling mercies, please, and we look forward to seeing everyone again in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a good afternoon.